In the 1970s in North Korea, a young man was deeply passionate about the art of cinema. He adored Hollywood films, especially those featuring James Bond, and dreamt of bringing glory to North Korean cinema. However, their film industry lagged significantly behind, and only new talents could revive it. The man had decent connections, including the father of the dictator, Kim Jong-il. With this support, he hatched a wild idea to turn this dream into reality. But before we delve further into North Korea, in this new episode, we'll discuss how filmmakers of the 20th century worked under the strong grip of dictators. You'll learn why Stalin disliked the long-awaited epic about Ivan the Terrible, the crimes they accused Hitler's favorite director of, and the ominous predecessor to the Venice Golden Lion. Being a director is a true calling. Not everyone can skillfully play with the imagination of audiences, create their own universes, and craft stories that hundreds believe in. But what if you're called to be a director in a country ruled by a dictator? Cinema captivated the world in the early 20th century, coinciding with the rise of dictators in European countries. As genuine human stories began replacing early cinematic frames, it became clear that a mass artistic genre had emerged. It captivated with its novelty and didn't require the audience to read or understand art. However, it was also evident that cinema had a powerful influence on people, shaping their thoughts, behavior, lifestyle, and emotions. Leaders saw it as a tool for propaganda, and directors learned to align their artistic ambitions with their country's needs. Sergei began making films in the early years of Soviet rule, and his techniques, like contrastive editing for tension or combining distant and close shots, are still used in filmmaking. The form of his films served art, but their content was in the service of the party. In the 1920s, his films focused on revolutionary masses, echoing the Bolshevik speeches. For instance, Battleship Potemkin, renowned for its iconic Odessa steppe sequence, deeply impressed Joseph Goebbels, who considered it a masterpiece of cinema. It seemed that Eisenstein was indeed a committed communist. However, in the 1930s, the state required something different. Avant-garde and artistic experiments became too complex, giving way to the state-approved style of socialist realism. Art had to be straightforward, politicized, and utilitarian. Censorship became stricter, and state control over cinema grew. Stalin, a cinephile himself, personally selected films for distribution, stating that the Soviet government awaited new successes and films that glorified the likes of Chapovy. These films had to mobilize for new tasks, reminding the viewers of both the achievements and the hardships of Soviet construction. When Eisenstein returned to the Soviet Union in 1932, after 3 years in the West, he had to adapt to the new rules. Shifting from a mass hero to a specific one who embodied all the positive traits the party valued, he struggled. In 1935, Eisenstein began work on a film about Pavel Morozov, but it was banned before completion. His work was criticized for constructivism, formalism, and anti-artistic elements. The film was too controversial for the prevailing standards, even featuring parallels with biblical narratives. The director publicly criticizes himself, only to quickly redeem himself and embark on films that would bring him recognition, the dictator's approval, awards, and fame. His 1938 film Alexander Nevsky followed the contemporary trend of Russian patriotism, replacing the early Bolshevik cosmopolitanism. The story of a prince defeating German invaders fit perfectly into the ongoing confrontation with the Third Reich. However, the following year, when Hitler and Stalin signed a non-aggression pact, the next project by Eisenstein, Ivan the Terrible, faced difficulties. The idea for the film was Stalin's, and the director was handpicked by his subordinates. Eisenstein was tasked with rehabilitating the image of the first Moscow Tsar, portraying him as a wise politician whose cruelty was necessary for building a strong state. A parallel was drawn between the main character and the Soviet leader, between the Oprichnina and the Great Terror. While the first series of the film received the highest recognition, the second series was personally criticized by Stalin, who found the Tsar indecisive, akin to Hamlet, and the Oprichniki, who were in reality a progressive military force. The second series was released only after the deaths of both the director and the leader. A young German actress and director, Leni Riefenstahl, was mesmerized by the oratory skills and charisma of Adolf Hitler, the leader of the Nazi Party. She famously stated, "For me, Hitler is the greatest man who ever lived. He truly is without fault. So simple and at the same time possessed of masculine strength. He is truly a great man. And I think that the relationship between him and me is the real romance." Her directorial career coincided with the Nazi Party's rise to power, which immediately placed cinema in their service. Apart from censorship and recommended film themes, they required directors to have German ancestry and citizenship. Riefenstahl had a Russian appearance, but quickly gained Hitler's favor, who promised that when he came to power, she would make films specifically for him. She filmed the 1933 Nuremberg Party rally, which formed the basis for the documentary Victory of Faith. Although it was relatively raw and unsuccessful, her next film, Triumph of the Will in 1934, is considered a classic of cinematic propaganda and a prominent example of the genre. Riefenstahl used underwater cameras, experimental techniques, and angles that would become standard in cinematography. The Nazi Party spared no expenses on her work. It involved dozens of cameramen, hundreds of technical personnel, and kilometers of film. Riefenstahl's directorial career essentially ended with the fall of the Third Reich. After the war, she faced several arrests and interrogations, but was not found guilty of personally committing any crimes. However, accusations of using Romani people from concentration camps as extras during the filming of Tiefland persisted. She vehemently denied this and, with varying degrees of success, sued those making these claims. Riefenstahl passed away at the age of 101, primarily engaging in photography. In 2002, a year before her death, she managed to release another film, this time about the underwater world. Another cinephile who valued cinema as a propaganda tool was Benito Mussolini. During his rule, Italian cinema received state financial support and enjoyed a privileged position in distribution. The government encouraged directors to make propaganda films or light sentimental comedies about the upper class, portraying a deceptive image of wealth and happiness among Italians. In an effort to elevate the prestige of Italian cinema, the Venice International Film Festival was established in 1932, where films are now honored with the Golden Lion. Back then, the main prize was Mussolini's Cup, which was awarded to the best foreign film. The film Olympia, previously mentioned, received this cup. One of the leading directors of fascist propaganda cinema was Alessandro Blasetti, but he successfully debuted with a little help from Mussolini's campaign for the reclamation of marshy lands. He produced the film Sun, which Mussolini hailed as a dawn of Russian cinema. In reality, it was a crude manipulation by the Italians who were against land reclamation. Blasetti depicted those who opposed it as facing tragic consequences, much like the film's protagonist, who lost his beloved due to his rebellious moods. In his film, The Old Guard, he again employed this manipulation, portraying the events leading up to Mussolini's rise to power in an Italian town. It depicted the confrontation between fascists and socialists, with the locals finally realizing who was good and who was evil only after the death of the fascist leader's younger brother. They then joined the fascist movement. However, despite Blasetti's film receiving Mussolini's cup, the regime still favored mini-realism in cinema rather than blatant propaganda. Perhaps Blasetti received Mussolini's award not for his straightforward works, but for his subtly pacifist spirit. His film, The Iron Crown, featured classic storylines about kings, tournaments for a princess's heart, and power struggles. This was a significant departure from his previous works. Critics sensed in the film a general mood reflecting the Italians' desire for peace after the fall of Mussolini's regime. Blasetti continued to make films for over 20 years, and for those who remembered his early work, he remained a fascist director. However, unlike Riefenstahl, he wasn't constantly reminded of that period, though it was clear to most that he had thrived under a dictatorship. The situation in democratic countries, such as the United States, which had become a leader in the film industry, was different. Compared to totalitarian states, American cinema, which was not directly controlled by the government, might have seemed like a commercial entertainment attraction. Yet, it wasn't completely free either. For instance, the Hays Code regulated directors' adherence to traditional morality norms, prohibiting the display of nudity on screen. After World War I, as we recently discussed, Hollywood had its own blacklist aimed at non-loyal artists. However, it's hard to imagine the U.S. president handpicking films for release. There were directors who emigrated from totalitarian countries to the U.S., such as Fritz Lang, who fled the Nazis, and Dmitry Bukovetsky, an immigrant from White Russia. Both became notable figures in Hollywood. Eisenstein, theoretically, could have chosen not to return from abroad, but he decided to go back to a place where he was already being labeled a deserter. It's a complex situation where mercenary calculations, the desire to create at any cost, and sincere faith in communism, Nazism, seem to have blended in the minds of the three heroes of this episode. Dictators preferred to have their court filmmakers, but it's not interesting. As for the future leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-il, he wasn't interested in how Hollywood movies were distributed. His focus was on the South Korean film industry. Director Shim Sang-ok and his former wife, actress Choi Yoon-hee, were abducted on Kim's orders, first kidnapped in Hong Kong, and then taken to a North Korean prison. Eventually, they were forced to make propaganda films. Their most famous film from this period is Pulgasari, a 1985 movie similar to Godzilla, but with ideological elements, a kind of trashy entertainment. They were allowed to go to Vienna to negotiate international distribution for their film, and it was during this trip that they managed to escape